So I've got my first show of the year on the 16th of February, which is next Sunday at Lincolnshire Showground. So I thought I'd make some earrings today because I'm a bit short of earrings. I had a bit of an Art Deco style in my head too. Okay, so I've drawn a little diagram of the sort of shape I'm going to go for, and I'm going to use the 3rd size to start with, and that's going to just make that first little loop we're going for. Let's just check it against my picture for reference. It just does need to be a little bit smaller. This just weirdly got straight on one side. I don't know why, so I'm just adjusting it again here. Just trying to get the shape right. Still annoying, so let's try again. Okay, that's slightly better. So obviously now we're going to make a second one. I do everything in pairs, in stages as you go along when you're making earrings, because you want every single piece to match, otherwise they pull out of shape and it's very difficult to copy it later on. So when you're happy you've got two the same, we're going to go ahead and fasten these off. So basically one's going to go one way and one's going to go the other, so that they're reflective of one another. You can see here I'm just making little gentle presses with my pliers, so I'm not going to squeeze them too hard. And we're just going to wrap round in a full loop and leave them at that until we're sure they match. So this one then needs to go off to the left, so I'm going to again hold right where they cross over. And you can use your pliers if you find it easier, but just sort of make sure you grab the end. We're not going to need that piece later on, so we're going to be snipping that little bit off. Get a fairly tight wrap round so that they're nice and symmetrical and even. And we'll just check again that they match. Pretty happy with those. So let's go ahead and snip off the little tails. So I like to leave about the width of whatever you're wrapping round, so about the width of the little base wire, and then lots of gentle little presses just until that tail really curls around that top wire there. And then I'm just going to straighten the top out so that it's going to hang straight down in like a water droplet shape. I'm going to repeat the process on the other side. You see how I'm not trying to force the metal down, otherwise all you'll do is squish it with your pliers like I just did at the end there. You kind of have to do lots of little presses to get the wire to bend around the other wire. It's always worth just checking them from the back as well, making sure they're not sharp, which is what I did by rubbing my finger over them there. You can file them with a needle file or a nail file if you find they are a little bit sharp. So there we have our reflective pair. One goes one way and one goes the other. So the next section is going to be the bottom loop that's going to hook through the loops we've just made. So this piece of wire is about 11 centimetres long. I'm only giving rough guides. I'll tell you what to get in the description below. So grabbing our bail making pliers on the biggest setting this time, we're going to start forming the little loops. Now these are quite long, I probably didn't need to make them as long as that. We're just going to sort of see where they sit on my paper drawing. Just keep manipulating them until they're about the same shape as the drawing. Let's make our second one. So again, largest loop of your bail making pliers and kind of make a really long teardrop shape. Checking all the time for symmetry, making sure they're about right. This one was also misbehaving and didn't want to go particularly round, so I'm just kind of pressing it into shape a bit more there. Okay, I think that looks better. So we've got those two now. I think they'll be about right by the time we get to working on the next part. I also like to use a steel block and a plastic or nylon hammer just to give these a little bit of a hammer, because this does what's called work hardening, and it basically means that it stiffens the wire for you so it's less likely to bend out of shape. I'm just going to give these two parts a bit of a hammer around the bottom section mainly to give them a little bit more strength. You don't have to do this, but it is going to help you if you've got those tools to hand. So the outer bit's probably going to be the hardest bit we do, so we need a little bit longer piece. And what we're going to do is fold it in half in the middle, and then we're going to press just the very tip completely flat. Then you're going to hold on to it there and very gently make a shallow V, giving a little bit of curve at the bottom. You can just grab the tip as well and kind of straighten that out to your needs. And then we're going to grab this one. We're going to go in from the back to the front. Now this bit is pretty fiddly, and basically what I'm trying to do is make that V sit nicely and curve out slightly, so about maybe a centimetre up the teardrop shape. We're going to start wrapping those arms around it, but we just need to adjust the shape to start with. So this V shape was sticking out from the bottom far too much, and I wanted it a little bit lower than that, just remembering to put it in from the back there. And it was quite tricky to do, and I was trying to think what's a good way of helping you guys out a little bit if you are a beginner or even seasoned pro. It's not the easiest thing to do, but I found I grabbed a little bit of weaving wire, just a piece of scrap, and I'm just going to kind of lash it in place 2 or 3 times on each side just to really help you get the shape a bit easier. We are going to be removing this in a few minutes, so it does not have to be pretty. Okay, now you can see that I'm getting it more centred, the little V's kind of sticking down where I wanted it, and I'm just adjusting it to make sure it's central, because that's the hardest bit. It does seem to want to slip around quite a bit. So now I'm going to really firmly hold it in place and just start rolling the wire from back to front around one of the arms of that teardrop shape. Now don't pull it too tight at this stage, because you don't want to kind of distort the shape, and they are still quite soft, these 0.8 wires. It might even be better doing it with 1mm thickness of wire, but I couldn't find my roll anywhere. Oh, God knows where that's gone. So I just persevered with the 0.8, and in the end they have turned out really pretty, so we'll continue with that. So I'm just kind of initially putting one wrap round to make sure it's central. That's quite important. Try not to do it too tight and then find it's not right. As long as you've got it central, we can go round for the second time. I decided to do 2 wraps because I just thought it felt more secure. And you can start just kind of adapting with your pliers a little bit to get those bends in position. We want the top one to be nice and tight. And really, I'm going to have to start filming further away. Apologies. I'm off camera again. Okay, so I'm just going to tighten this one up a little bit. If you're holding it and supporting it right next to where your working wire is, you probably will find it easier, which is what I tend to do quite a lot. I hold it really close to where I'm working, just to make sure it doesn't bend out of shape. So as soon as you're working with thicker wire, it's quite difficult and quite hard on your fingers if you're learning. So don't worry too much. You can use a pliers as long as you're gentle. So just giving these wires an initial straighten, because we will need to straighten those out with our nylon pliers in a minute. And now we can take off that scrappy weaving wire, but we will use it on the other one, so it is just worth undoing it rather than wasting another piece. So that's one framey bit kind of made nearly. Just going to straighten out the centre, make sure that's really nice and even. So obviously I'm just speeding up here, showing you the process of doing the second one. Keep checking it against the first to make sure it's all even. Okay, so hopefully now these two will pretty much match. We'll just have another look. I think these are looking pretty good. Yeah, I'm quite happy with those. I mean, the tip of one of them is very slightly lower than the other, but I don't think I'm going to worry that much about it. I think I went back in. Yes, I did. So I kind of twisted it slightly to kind of take up a bit more of the wire at the bottom, a bit more of the curve, and then that sat ever so slightly better than before, so I was happy with that. They're very, very nearly a pair, which is great. So now we can start looking where these little lines are is pretty much where those wraps around the teardrop shape's going to be. So basically you just need to kind of hold it in position and adjust all the wires to the shape of your template. Quite simple really. One thing I will say though is it's really worth straightening all of your wires with your nylon pliers before you do this, because obviously the right hand side you can see is a bit of a mess. I do this later on, but my left hand side seemed quite straight, so I didn't actually need to on that side. So I'm just giving it a bit of a pre-straighten with my fingers, and I can't find my normal nylon pliers, so I've used my little ones, and they aren't quite as good, but they still did the job. So you're just kind of running it through with quite a lot of pressure 3 or 4 times, and then you get that nice straight piece to work with. I'm just repositioning again, and we're just holding the bottom in place with my finger, and then I'm just going to kind of work it round, make sure that curve is as smooth as it can be. Keep playing until it kind of sits where you need it to be. So the sheep's nearly there now. I didn't really want the little curve at the top in the left hand one. And I did actually change my design idea. I spent hours weaving the outer sections, and then I decided I really didn't like it, so I have actually swapped the design from what I did originally. So at this point you can leave the outer wires straight at the top if you want to, but we're getting there. I just had a little flat spot there, so I very, very gently went in and tried to make it a bit more curvy. And I decided to straighten that out a bit as well, because it was also a little bit too curvy. So obviously make your second one. Make sure the front's to the front, obviously, because some of them will be back to front. Just make sure they both match. That's one thing you've got to really keep an eye on when you've got wires wrapping around other wires, because sometimes they're not that obvious. So now it's time to sort of set that little loop that we made initially, but I'm just going to kind of level it up because I want that to sit right at the top. But that inner teardrop, we're not going to need as much of those wires. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of level up the outer wires first and get those straight. So I decided at the end the 3 top wires, which are going to be the 2 outer wires and then the middle stem of that little loop, they're going to be kind of looping around a jump ring to make the connection to your ear wire. So this is why I'm just adjusting these now, just to kind of get them out of my way a little bit. So when you've got your shape symmetrical, then we're going to kind of figure out on these middle wires which ones we're going to snip off, and I decided to take them just on the outside there. I did actually have too much in hindsight, But as I was working out the design at this point, obviously, I'm just kind of doing it as I go. So apologies if this doesn't really make any sense. But basically, I'm just shortening those inner 2 wires because they're going to wrap around the little loop, not the outer loop. So here I'm just making sure that loop's the correct way round. We want all the cut off bits to head to the back, and then we're going to attach those middle wires. So I'm just kind of lining this up here, and again I grab a little piece of spare weaving wire. I just find it easier sometimes to just lash things together. For me anyway, you don't have to do it this way, it's just I find it a little bit easier. So I'm just going to straighten out that little teardrop shape so it kind of lies and hangs really symmetrically and centrally. And in hindsight, actually, it wasn't easier to lash them together because I left these a little bit too long, because basically what I'm trying to do is loop them through the little mini teardrop. So I'm just kind of wriggling at this stage to kind of get them in place. When I made the second earring, I actually attached these pieces first before I did the outer loops, which is also another thing you could do. I did find it easier in the end, but obviously when you first make something, it's difficult to know what's going to be the best because you're kind of working in your creative flow and you don't really know what's going to occur. But basically all I was doing is wrapping those around that loop. At least doing it this way, I could kind of control the shape a little bit more and make sure I was getting it exactly where I wanted it. So even though it might look a bit kind of backwards, my way of working is often backwards, it just, I don't know, it worked out. So I was happy with it in the end. So I'm going to continue on here and I'm just going to keep very gently looping these down. So I don't want to distort any of the shapes. And I do need to leave a little gap between these 2 wires because I want to dangle something in the middle in a bit. So I'm just going to very gently press those down and kind of adjust them until they look symmetrical, but you've left a little space in the middle there between the 2. Just keep working my way around, trying to get my pliers in without scratching anything. And just very gentle, lots of little manoeuvres until you can kind of get everything into position. And we're going to fasten those off when we're happy with them. Now I'm happy with the shape, I'm just going to go back in and snip off those little tiny tails. Just leave a little bit, just enough to kind of tuck back round on itself, but not see it from the front. Obviously make any adjustments you need to the shape, and we can just remove that weaving wire now, just so we've got that shape ready to go. So let's just double check the shape again against the other ones, make sure nothing's gone to astray. Pretty happy with that. So we just need to repeat the process until you've got 2 frames the same. So we've got our little pair of frames that are looking really sweet and nice and symmetrical. So I'm just going to grab a bit more 0.4mm weaving wire. I'm just going to take myself a piece probably about 6 inches long. So I'm just going to grab my little piece of weaving wire and I'm going to just wrap 3 times around the outside on one side. I tend to find sometimes with a shorter piece of weaving wire it's easier to kind of push it up through the frame rather than trying to feed it through from the very end. It'll take you a lot longer doing it that way. And what I want to do is kind of make them sit next to each other a bit like that. So although they're not quite tight enough to that little mini teardrop, we might have to make these loops a little bit bigger than I wanted them to be. that's how it kind of worked out, so that's what we're going to go with. So I'm just going to pop 2 loops around both and then another 3 around the outside. If you do find you're having to kind of go through the middle from the tail end, I find it easiest to kind of roll it through. On this one it's easy because you can just push it through and then wrap 3 times around. It's very simple, but with the smaller shape you might need to put the tail end through. So you need to try and keep that weaving wire kind of like in a circle, if that makes sense, so you can push it through. As it happened this time, it let me go through, but you can see they're a little bit longer, these weaves, than I would normally like them, but the frame didn't sit together as I'd expected, so this is kind of what we went with. So I put 3 double loops through the little mini teardrop, and then there was 3 wraps in between each, and we ended on 3. So we're just going to go in now and snip off any little tails. Just make sure I've pushed my weave nicely together first. Try and snip off my weaving wires to the inside so it can't catch on like hair or clothing or anything like that, and just give it a very, very gentle little press so we don't crush the weave, and make sure that that little tail end's really tucked in. And sometimes it's nice to do it from the back as well, depending on which direction your weaving wire's going in. So that's one side finished. So obviously now we're going to whip it over and do the same thing. You just have to make sure that you've got the correct amount of wraps from the front so they all look the same. So just keep an eye on that while you're doing it, especially if you're working from back to front like I am sometimes. I've turned it to the front here just to make sure, and that's why I'm having to weave with the end through quite regularly. So now I just gave it a little press with my nylon pliers just to make sure it was all nice and flat and straight. And obviously we're going to snip off those other little weaving wires as well. Now mine has gone ever so slightly out of shape at the top. I think I pulled it a little bit too tight, but it still looked pretty, so I'm just going to go with it. Just kind of adjusting the shape and making sure it's all flat at this point, and then I was just making sure I got enough little room for the little dangly bit. Can't get it through. Just gonna have to open that out a little bit. I will show you how to make this. I've had to kind of chop and change my videos to make this all work, but that's kind of how we're gonna make it look a little bit later on. So the next stage, which is optional, I'm gonna hammer the outsides of these ones to make them look a bit flatter, and also make them look a bit more kind of professional, make them harder. I just like the look of hammering. So I've used a domed chasing hammer. So the domed face is very important because that's going to give you that kind of flare at the sides there. And I always work from the back because then it means if you do mark your wire at all, you're not going to see it from the front because it's hitting against a flat surface. So that other side just needed a little bit more. And you're kind of going to hit very gently, but in strokey motions. You can see I kind of draw it from left to right as I hit the metal very gently. And that just flares the metal where you want it to go. Just going to continue on until I'm happy with the shape. So you have to kind of be soft towards the top of the wires and harder where you want them to flare out a bit wider. And I also just grabbed my nylon hammer there and just gave that a little bit of a flatten because it was twisting on me. So here it is with those little hammered sections. You can see they catch the light really beautifully. It just gives a more professional finish to your jewellery. So the next step, I've just folded all 3 wires forward to the left. So this is the front if you're looking at it. And I'm just going to grab all 3 and then fold them over the back of my smallest bail making plier to make a loop for all 3. And I've since discovered they needed to be close together to fit through the jump ring I'm going to make. So yeah, that's where we were with that one. So if I come back on camera, hopefully, there we go. So I'm snipping off a little bit closer because I didn't want those loops to be too big. You can see I've snipped them off, and then I'm just going to go in with my little tweezer nose. No, not my round nose pliers, and I've left some masking tape on there just to demonstrate that if you want them all the same size, you can kind of start them where you want them. So I'm just adjusting a little bit until I've got them how I wanted them. So there's kind of where we're at. They will need a bit straightening out, but as long as they're all kind of level and looking correct, that's all we need to do really. So we're going to ignore the design in the background because that's the one I decided I didn't like. And now we're going to make some jump rings. So you're basically just going to grab a bit of wire and make a coil around the second largest mandrel on your bail making pliers. Now I like to use metal shears or tin snips. I've got my tin snips here. Metal shears are easier, I've discovered since, but tin snips make really nice sharp cuts and they're flush. They're much better than using flush cutters, which leave a pointy bit on one side. So you can see when they get them together, and this is not how you do it by the way, when you do get them together and my camera decides to focus, hopefully you should be able to see it's like, although it's a diagonal cut, it's a flush cut, and they do just seem to work a little bit better. So using a jump ring, then you twist them open, you never pull them open. And this is the point where I realised I needed all 3 together. So we're just going to pretend this is the earring we're working on, because I've got this on video and it's easier than chopping and changing. So it goes through all 3, and then you're going to grab another pair of pliers, preferably some flat pliers. I'm trying to find them at this point. Nailed it. Right, so flat pliers. You're going to grab them on the side, so you're supporting as much of the jump ring as possible, and you kind of wriggle them together and twist them up a little bit at the same time. And that kind of puts a tension on them. And then we're just going to kind of fiddle with it until you can get hold of them and give them a very, very gentle press together so they kind of lock together. And just check from the side that they're all nice and straight. And that's kind of where we're at. So obviously we're going to do that on both of our earrings. And then we're going to make these little blue kyanite flat back cabochon dangly accents next. So we're just going to make one loop with our smallest bail making plier. You want one end to be a lot longer than the other, because you're going to have the short end as the tail and the long end is the bit we're going to wrap around the stone. And basically what I'm doing here is just making a base for the stone to sit on, and it's got a little bit wibbly wobbly here, so I'm just flattening it all out. It's quite tough on your fingers, so you might find this quite tricky. So that's our little base for the stone. I'm just going to grab the stone then and pop it in place. Now this is much easier with a faceted stone with a pointy back, but I'd got these lovely little blue kyanite and I thought, well, I'd rather have a gemstone earring than a CZ earring, cubic zirconia. I just think they're prettier. So basically what we're going to do is make a basket for it. So you're going to go around the outside reasonably loosely. It doesn't want to be really tight around the stone, because all that will happen is it'll push it up and it'll pop out. So just kind of hold the stone in place and it will stick to your finger and it'll go everywhere like it does. And you'll also find that your little basket goes a bit astray. So you can see here it's twisted on me. So flattening it back out, pop the stone in again. You can see I'm kind of making like a little bezel setting for it. And if you do a bit of silversmithing or you've ever made any jewellery, a bezel setting is basically just like a little wall around the outside. So that's what we're doing. So we're making a wall around the outside. Mine was a little bit small and my stone was popping out. That's why I'm just adjusting it here again. So you're holding it in place and wrapping it around. And then when you've got it where you want it and you've got a wall all the way around the outside, we're going to do one more wrap all the way around until you meet the other leg, and that's going to be on the inside. So that's basically going up and over like the domed part of your stone. So you can see, hopefully, it kind of hugs the stone a little bit, but this did just go a little bit astray, so I had to keep adjusting it. I've not done a flat back stone this way before, actually, so this was a new one for me too. It seemed to be working for me then, so I was quite happy. And then last but not least, when you've got that last loop tight enough to kind of hug the shoulders of the stone, I'm going to just wrap that around its little leg that you've left for it. So I'm pretty happy with this at this point. I think I'll go around twice just to make sure it's super secure. Again, pull it with the outer part so you're not going to mark the wire, and then just adjust with your pliers when you get to the end. We'll snip that tail off and fasten it to the back. And then we have our little stone setting. I'm going to make a little dangle with it. I'm just going to kind of straighten it first, and then I'm going to fold the wire forwards because I've got to use my loop making pliers next. I don't know if you've seen these before. These are absolutely brilliant for consistent loops. But I like to fold my wire forward so the cut end goes off the back. So all you've got to do is put the wire through the hole and get the left hand jaw to sit right at the base where my fingers are, and when it clips, it'll make you a really lovely consistent loop like that. And this is really handy if you don't get any kind of chains or any kind of loops that you need to do quite regularly, which I do. These are an absolute godsend. So all we have to do is twist it open, and then we're going to pop it on our little frame in the middle. Try and get it back into focus. There we go. And then obviously just twist that back into place to secure it. And how pretty are they? Such delicate, very lightweight earrings. If these don't sell at the weekend, I will be very surprised. So last but not least, then I'm going to teach how I make ear wires. So I use 0.8 half hard wire for this because I find it's just that little bit stronger, because I'm not heating the wire at all, so it's not going to be any softer for any reason. And we're just, like we did with the V's, we're just going to squish them closed at the base. I make them as a matching pair all the way through, just to make sure that they stay symmetrical, because sometimes if you've made a lovely symmetrical earring that match in size and shape, and then your ear wire's off, one will hang lower than the other and it looks absolutely atrocious, and it's the easiest way to lose a sale. So obviously we don't want that to happen. I'm going to grab our smallest bit of the bail making right where that fold is, and we're going to make that full turn till it touches the base wires again. Then we're going to use the second to largest size on the pliers. I like to put the loop right up to them and wrap these round to make that kind of fish hook shape. Just going to straighten these out a little bit because one of them is a bit wonky, and like I say, we want to keep them as absolutely perfectly identical as we possibly can. So the next bit then, we're going to bend them out a little way, maybe, I don't know what it is, 45 degrees maybe. That was a tiny bit too much. But I do that at the base of where the loop is, and then I like to leave a decent tail to snip off, because that's the bit that actually goes through the ear, and if it's too short it's actually quite difficult to put them through. So there we go, that's our pair of ear wires. So the next step is optional. I like to hammer the kind of back curve of my ear wires because it gives them a little bit more strength, and you'll find they don't bend out of shape quite so easily. Again, I'm using my dome chasing hammer for this, but I do it on both sides for each wire. You can see that's flattened it out really lovely, and it kind of you can see it's quite a tension in there. If I grab the other one, you can see it's just a little bit easier to spring the one that you haven't hammered. So I always find that's a really good thing to do. What you can also do is get a thing called a cup burr, and that will also just round off the ends of your ear wires and make them a little bit less sharp for putting through the ear. You can also do this with a nail file or a needle file if you wish. So now you just need to open that loop, attach it through the jump ring, and there we go. These are ready for oxidisation. So here they are, all oxidised and polished, ready for sale. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you did make any, please leave me some comments below and let me know how you got on. I also have a really pretty new PDF tutorial in my Etsy shop. I'll leave the link below. This is Iris. She is available on my website for the time being, so check her out if you'd like to learn how to make her.